at 5:14 a.m. in international waters, just 90 meters off Key West, Florida. Something shocking set off a red alert across the entire US NORTHCOM. On satellite screens, Putin's massive 13,000-ton nuclear submarine, the Kazan, suddenly disappeared without a trace. Chaos erupted in the fleet. Where did it go? And what was it doing so close to the US? With a sub like that lurking nearby, any scenario could turn into a nightmare. The ocean must have felt like a victory for Moscow, thinking the Americans would never catch on. But they were in for a rude awakening. This bold move was a risky bet, and the US Navy was ready to turn that confidence into a painful lesson. To grasp the danger, you need to know about the Kazan submarine, the Yason M class. This beast, stretching for 156 feet long, is the peak of Russian military tech, built for one thing: stealth and destruction. The Kazan is as loud as motorcycles revving their engines, gliding through the night like a sleek Tesla. It's armed with Zircon hypersonic missiles that can hit Mach 9. That means from launch to hitting a target in Florida, you wouldn't even have time to finish your coffee. Once it hit the Caribbean, the Kazan dove deep, stopping right at the thermocline, where warm and cold water mix, messing with sonar signals. At the same time, it powered down all active systems. Switching to ultra-quiet mode, the Russians had a clever plan. They sent out the destroyer Gorskov and the tugboat Chiker to sail right above, creating a noise shield. The loud sounds from the surface ships drown out the submarine below, making it tough for the US to figure out what was going on. Moscow's message was crystal clear. They could put pressure on Washington whenever they wanted. This was just a reconnaissance probe, showing they meant business. Escalation scenario. And in response to the provocation, the US Navy immediately entered the fray. And you, if you were in their shoes, faced with this Russian knife to the throat, what do you think the US should do? 1. Show off its strength, forcing Kazan to reveal itself at all costs. 2. Set an underwater trap, silently hunting to get the upper hand. Leave your choice. Place your bets before we see the US's bold move right after this. The US started this game with a move that looked very amateurish. They dispatched the destroyer USS Donald Cook straight to the scene, turned on its high-powered radar, and flashed its eyes transponder brightly as a public warning that the Russian submarine's deliberate disappearance in the sensitive area adjacent to U.S. territorial waters was a dangerous, provocative act that crossed the line of maritime safety. Below deck, the Russian captain looked at the sonar screen and sneered. He believed that the U.S. fleet was truly panicking, convinced that his stealth capabilities were still perfect and that his opponent still had no idea of the ship's actual position. But they did not know that the noisy destroyer was just a decoy to distract them. While the real ears and ears of the U.S. had been quietly deployed from the air at an altitude of 3,000 feet, a P-8A Poseidon appeared. It flew off axis, circling very widely at a distance far enough to avoid triggering the enemy's defensive reflexes. It dropped passive sonar buoys one by one in a grid pattern, spaced several nautical miles apart at each exit in turn. They formed an invisible acoustic fence blocking the path of the Kazan. At the same time, at a depth of 400 feet below the surface, another American ghost had also taken position. The fast attack submarine USS Helena. Information from the sonar buoy sensors would be encoded and sent directly to the USS Helena's combat screen. Its mission was to lie in wait, acting as the final goalkeeper if the Kazan slipped through the net. However, the Russian captain was novice to sit idly by and wait for death in this cage. He knew full well what the Americans would do, and he had prepared a gift. As soon as the early warning system detected the sonar buoy signal hitting the water, the Kazan launched an MG-70 for self-propelled acoustic decoy. This device emitted engine noise identical to the acoustic signature of a Yasen-class submarine accelerating eastward at 25 knots. On the surface, the trap immediately snapped shut. Data from the sonar buoy transmitted a bright red alert throughout the USS Donald Cook's entire system. The surface fleet, commanding officers tasked with protecting the coastline at all costs, could not risk ignoring the target. They immediately turned the ship and accelerated eastward in pursuit of their prey. The American blockade was torn open with a large gap at the bottom of the sea aboard the USS Helena. The sonar officer also reported that the target was fleeing. The pressure was immense. The entire fleet was moving, and if the Helena did not pursue, they would be left behind. But Captain Helena, a seasoned veteran, raised his hand and ordered, "Hold position, maintain silence." His intuition told him that something was perfect. Would the Russian ship really run so noisily, or was this a trick? It was a terrible gamble. If he guessed wrong, the real Kazan would escape, and he would be the scapegoat for letting Russian nuclear weapons slip through right at his doorstep. Cold sweat began to run down the spines of the American sailors. They stood still in the darkness, while the entire fleet had left to chase the signal. He was betting on the ship's signal processing algorithm. When the Helena stood still, the sonar system began its adaptive noise filtering process. The computer was accustomed to the noise of the Gorskov, so it began to treat it as background noise and automatically filtered it out. And at that very moment, the miracle happened. Taking advantage of the U.S. surface fleet chasing the other target, Kazan made its second move. It silently slipped into the Gulf Stream, the strongest and noisiest underwater river in the Atlantic. However, when Kazan secretly separated from the belly of the Gorskov to turn west, the chaotic sound above was suddenly torn apart. Immediately, the Helena sonar picked up a very faint sound. The sonar operator shouted, "Contact separation. I have a signal breaking west," and Kazan was exposed the moment it left its shield. However, the roaring sound of the Gulf Stream acted as a wall of white noise. Kazan shut down its main engines, drifting freely. Carried away by the current at a speed of 5 knots, it blended completely into the noise of the ocean. On the USS Helena, the sonar screen became chaotic. Environmental noise spiked. The sonar operator reported, "Lost target. Too much noise. I can't tell which is the Russian ship and which is the sound of the current." The American captain was forced to take a risk. He ordered a nearly 30,000 feet towed-array sonar cable to be deployed behind the ship. This helped the Helena filter out noise better, but at a high price. The Helena was forced to move extremely slowly to prevent the cable from breaking. From a nimble assassin, the American ship was now a slow, vulnerable turtle. As soon as the array was operational, the American computer filtered out a very faint transient to the west. The Helena immediately steered cautiously toward the sound, but the Russians weren't going to stand still and be caught. The Kazan's flank array system detected a change in water pressure behind it. The Russian captain knew the hunting dog was still there. He immediately changed tactics. On the Helena's sonar screen, the officer suddenly frowned, pressing his hand tightly over his earpiece. "Boss, strange sound. High-frequency water hiss like a gas valve." Immediately afterwards, the Kazan's clear signal suddenly became distorted, blurred like a photo splashed with water. The data on the sonar waterfall display indicated that the angle of the sound source was pointing deeper. The American captain looked at the screen and understood the problem immediately. He's flooding his ballast tanks to drop below the thermocline. It was a perfect defensive move. The cold water below would act as a giant reflective mirror. The passive sonar waves from the Helena would be bent and bounce back to the surface. In an instant, the signal disappeared completely. The sonar screen returned to a silent black. The Americans lost track of it for the second time. The situation was now extremely tense. Helena was dragging a long tangled tail, maneuvering slowly and temporarily, blinded by the thermocline. Kazan was safely hidden under the thermal shield, loaded with torpedoes and waiting. If Helena made even a small mistake, the roles of hunter and prey would be reversed immediately. Blinded by the heat layer and deafened by the distance, Captain Helena could not just sit on the surface and cast a line, hoping Kazan would come out on its own. He ordered, "Retrieve the towing ray. Dive planes 15 down. We're going to break through the heat layer." The entire command compartment was stunned. This was the most dangerous maneuver in submarine warfare. When the ship crossed the boundary between warm and cold water, the sound would be refracted violently. For those few minutes, the Helena would be completely deaf. They were plunging into the abyss without knowing if there were rocks below or a torpedo waiting for them. The ship shook violently as it passed through the pressure layers 500 feet, 600 feet, 700 feet. The steel hull creaked under the enormous water pressure and then pop. The moment the bow of the Helena pierced the cold water, below the curtain of sound was torn apart. The sonar screen previously distorted suddenly became frighteningly clear, and what they saw made the blood of every sailor run cold. The Kazan was hovering right in front of the Helena, less than 2,000 yards away. In the vast ocean, this distance was like two men pointing guns at each other's foreheads in a cramped elevator. The Russian captain miscalculated. He thought the Helena would be too afraid to dive, so he stopped the ship to ambush it. But when he saw the American ship looming right behind him, the Russian survival instinct kicked in. The Kazan side sensor system blared its alarm. The Russian captain did not hesitate. He ordered the ship to make a sharp 180 turn, pointing the bow directly at the pursuer. The situation had now turned into the worst-case scenario. On this side, the Kazan opened its torpedo tubes. The sound of tubes flooding rang out clearly on the American sonar. It was the sound of weapons being loaded. On the other side, the Helena's weapons. Officer also shouted, "Firing solution, locked Mk-48 torpedoes ready." The two nuclear monsters, with a combined weight of nearly 30,000 tons, faced each other in eternal darkness. No one moved. No one dared to breathe heavily. Just one trembling finger, one tiny misunderstanding, and the Caribbean Sea would become a radioactive graveyard. Time seemed to stand still. Cold sweat poured down the foreheads of the officers in the Combat Information Center. The American captain stared at the target data. He knew his opponent. A tense stare-off was happening. Who would blink first? Then, a sound shattered the silence, a single ping from the Russian ship. It wasn't a firing signal, it was a silent agreement in the sub-world. I see you, you see me. We both know what happens if we shoot. The Russian captain slowly closed the torpedo tubes, turned the bow, pumped air into the ballast tanks, and started surfacing toward Havana. The American captain let out a breath and ordered his weapons down. Why didn't he? The U.S. intercept? Well, the ultimate goal was nailed. In those tense moments when the Russian system went into combat mode, the Helena's sensors picked up the enemy's entire electronic fingerprint and fire control frequencies. The story wraps up with the Kazan docking in Havana, celebrated by the media as a hero for challenging the U.S. right on its home turf. But down below, the crew of the USS Helena just grinned. They knew the real deal. The U.S. totally won this battle. Turning the enemy's secret weapon into a data file that's saved on NATO's Gervers is pretty wild. Right. So, the next time you hear about a missing Russian submarine, don't freak out too much for the US. Just a heads up. This video is based on real events, but has been dramatized a bit to help you see how tech, tactics, and military strategies really play out. Some details might be a little hypothetical, but our aim is to break down military thinking, tech, and warfare for your understanding. What do you think about how this game turned out? Should the US take a tougher stance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Navy Vector for more intense battle breakdowns.